So today we're going to talk about what CBT is like, and I imagine that lots of you have questions about this, and so I'm going to ask Adam to tell us a bit about that. So could you give us an idea, Adam, about what is CBT like, if I was coming to see you as a client?
Sure. Well, it's not unlike sitting here now. It's just a conversation in that sense. It's a talking cure. So we sit and we talk. We work out at the beginning of the session what we're going to talk about, what the purpose of the conversation is, and what you'd like to achieve. And then we work out how we're going to do that. It's as simple as that, really. It's very businesslike, very focused, but I hope also it's a friendly and warm conversation. And then, once we've decided on some sort of action plan, you, the client, go off and do the thing, whatever it is that you need to do. Come back, report back, and say how things have gone.
Okay. And so what kind of problems might I be able to come and see a CBT therapist about?
That's an important point, because we don't solve all problems about everything, and it's important to keep focus on the sort of problems we attend to. So mainly in psychotherapy and cognitive behavioural therapy, we're interested in problems to do with emotion, problems to do with feelings usually, and how people are functioning in their relationships with themselves and with other people. So we tend to look at things perhaps like depression, anxiety, mood disorders, and some of the specific symptoms of certain sorts of anxiety, like obsessive compulsive thoughts or behaviour or phobias, and also relationship issues, relationships at home with partners and family, and also maybe work relationships.
Right.
So that's the sort of area that we talk about.
Okay. And can you give me an example of some of the work that I might be doing if I was coming to see you as a client?
Yeah. Well, within the session, we might, or between sessions, we might ask you to answer questionnaires. Increasingly nowadays, I find I email questionnaires to people rather than get them to fill them in the session, so we can save time. So we might get you to do questionnaires to find out more information. Within the session, we might draw what we call problem formulations. So we draw diagrams to try and explain between ourselves, so we both have the same understanding of what's causing, for example, the anxiety. So we're very fond in CBT of flowcharts. So I might draw a box on a piece of paper with the word anxiety in it, or panic attack, and then we try and work out, well, then what happens before that experience happens? Does a thought trigger it off? Is there some event? And then when that happens, what do you do when you have the panic attack or the anxiety? And that would be another box that we draw. We try and work out from that how the panic attacks or whatever we're talking about are being caused, and then from that theory we then derive some sort of treatment program of what you could do to disrupt that pattern of events and not have the panic attacks, if that's what it was we were focusing on.
Right, I see. And so how much work do you think I might need to do as a client in order to sort of get over that kind of a problem?
You mean how many sessions we would need?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it varies because it depends how much work you're prepared to do between sessions, and also how quickly you progress and how much you know and have worked out for yourself before you come. There's a lot of self-help materials available, and we often point people in the direction of those as well. So some people, it's a learning model, and some people learn more quickly than others, and some people have more support at home, and to be honest, some people are more motivated than others, so it varies. But it's a fairly focused sort of therapy, so we're working on specific problems. We're not generally working on loose and baggy things, like, oh, I don't feel very happy. We try and tie it down to more specific goals than just feeling happier. And we tend to be very focused, and so we can usually say we will attend to a problem perhaps in perhaps a handful of sessions, perhaps a handful to 12 sessions on average. Some people with enduring mental health problems will see for much longer, and some people will only need a couple of sessions, but you're usually talking about a ballpark of a handful to perhaps 12 sessions.
Right.
But it depends, and that's of course by negotiation, and we see how we go. But usually a decent cognitive behavioural therapist will give you an idea at the beginning of roughly how many sessions you're likely to need.
Okay, that's helpful. And how often might somebody be coming to see you?
Frequency. Well, that varies again. It depends on the therapist and the client. I tend to see people usually about every fortnight when we're in the active phase of the work. I find that longer than a fortnight you start to lose continuity, and if it's shorter, not enough time has passed for things to have happened or for people to have done the work between sessions. But then as you get towards the end of therapy, you tend to phase out a little bit and perhaps work towards once a month, something like that.
Okay. And I guess traditionally somebody might come to see you in person. What do you think about the idea of using sort of technology or telephone for this kind of
I think you've got a very different answer from me and a lot of colleagues a few years ago, but now we're much more comfortable with that, so I don't think we do need to meet face to face. Some people prefer face to face, but it's amazing how we've all become much more comfortable with the telephone or the internet. And I often do Skype sessions with people, and they seem to work equally well. They feel different, but then any change of context is going to feel different. But they seem to work equally well. They've got a slightly more business-like feel to them. They're a little bit more crisp, I find, but the outcomes seem to be as good.
Right. Okay.
And obviously it's a fantastic advantage if you have problems travelling, or you live a long way from the therapist, or you just don't want to spend the time getting in the car. You just rather do the work direct. It's much more convenient.
It's encouraging. It makes it seem much more accessible.
Yeah,
if I was looking for help.
Plus. Yeah, and of course also if people are housebound for various reasons, or maybe have children, small children at home and so on, it means they can access services much more easily.
Well, it sounds like there's some good help available in terms of this, and it can be really flexible, and I suppose meeting the preferences and needs of a particular client that might be approaching you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing we should say is about the idea of relapse prevention. That's an important point to make, particularly on this topic about what's CBT about. And the things we should say about that are that towards the end of therapy, we specifically have in mind as part of our treatment protocols that we always do a section on stopping relapses. So we don't just sort out the problem and leave it at that, but we have a session or two at the end of treatment where we say, well, what are we going to do if this problem recurs? And remind people of what seemed to help the problem go away this time round, and remind them of what they could do next time if it starts to get bad again, if the anxiety returns or the depressive feelings or whatever it is, and come up with a plan of action for ways of perhaps noticing when things start to slide, and have a plan of what you'll do at each point depending on how badly they've slid.
Yeah.
And that hopefully will mean that we don't see people returning quite as often.
I think it can be probably quite daunting for a client coming towards the end of therapy and preparing for an ending and not being able to sort of have that support anymore. I do a development plan along those lines, called it the Going Alone plan.
Oh, okay.
Going It Alone, which I think kind of works quite well in terms of sums up really a lot of what that experience might be like.
Yeah, and presumably you do as I would do, and when you've finished the piece of work, I always say to people, if you do need to come back, that's always an option. We tend to call them top-ups, don't we? You can always come back for a one-off. You don't have to sign up for a whole treatment program again. If you needed to come back just for a single session, that would be fine. Yeah,
and I think often people don't, but it's quite helpful to know that you can.
Yeah, I often feel we should be paid a retainer. But the fact that people know, they often say, oh, well, I know I can always come back, and that helps me. And I think, oh, we should be paid a retainer for that then.
That sounds really helpful. So, obviously, hopefully we've covered quite a lot of your questions there. Obviously, if you also have some more questions, then it'd be good for you to contact us directly.